Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the human genome. Chromosome 1, top left, bottom right are the sex chromosomes. Women have 2 copies of that big X chromosome. Men have the X and, of course, that small copy of the Y. Sorry, boys, but it's just a tiny little thing that makes you different. So if you zoom in on this genome, then what you see, of course, is this double helix structure. The code of life spelled out with these 4 biochemical letters, or we call them bases, right? A, C, G, and T. How many are there in the human genome? 3 billion. Is that a big number? Well, everybody can throw around big numbers, but in fact, if I were to place 1 base on each pixel of this 1280 by 800 resolution screen, we would need 3,000 screens to take a look at the genome. So it's really quite big. And perhaps because of its size, a group of people, all by the way with Y chromosomes, decided that they would want to sequence it. And so 15 years actually, and about $4 billion later, the genome was sequenced and published. In 2003, the final version was published, and they keep working on it. That was all done on a machine that looks like this. It costs about $1 for each base, very slow way of doing it. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that the world has completely changed, and none of you know about it. So now what we do is we take a genome, we make maybe 50 copies of it, we cut all those copies up into little 50 base reads, and then we sequence them massively parallel. And then we bring that into software, and we reassemble it, and we tell you what the story is. And so just to give you a picture of what this looks like, the Human Genome Project, 3 gigabases, right? 1 run on one of these modern machines, 200 gigabases in a week. And that 200 is going to change to 600 this summer, and there's no sign of this pace slowing. So the price of a base, to sequence a base, has fallen 100 million times. That's the equivalent of you filling up your car with gas in 1998, waiting until 2011, and now you can drive to Jupiter and back twice. World population, PC placements, the archive of all the medical literature, Moore's Law, the old way of sequencing, and here's all the new stuff. Guys, this is a log scale. You don't typically see lines that go up like that, right? So the worldwide capacity to sequence human genomes is something like 50 to 100,000 human genomes this year. And we know this based on the machines that are being placed. This is expected to double, triple, or maybe quadruple year over year for the foreseeable future. In fact, there's one lab in particular that represents 20% of all of that capacity. It's called the Beijing Genomics Institute. The Chinese are absolutely winning this race to the new moon, by the way. What does this mean for medicine? So a woman, age 37, she presents with stage 2 estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. She is treated with surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. She goes home. 2 years later, she comes back with stage 3C ovarian cancer, unfortunately treated again with surgery and chemotherapy. Comes back 3 years later at age 42 with more ovarian cancer, more chemotherapy. 6 months later, she comes back with acute myeloid leukemia. She goes into respiratory failure and dies 8 days later. So first, the way in which this woman was treated in as little as 10 years will look like bloodletting. And it's because of people like my colleague Rick Wilson at the Genome Institute at Washington University, who decided to take a look at this woman post-mortem. And he took skin cells, healthy skin, and cancerous bone marrow, and he sequenced the whole genomes of both of them, right? In a couple weeks, no big deal, right? And then he compared those 2 genomes in software, and what he found, among other things, was a deletion, a 2,000 base deletion across 3 billion bases, right? In a particular gene called TP53, if you have this deleterious mutation in this gene, you're 90% likely to get cancer in your life. So unfortunately, this doesn't help this woman, but it does have profound, if you will, implications to her family, right? I mean, if they have the same mutation and they get this genetic test and they understand it, then they can go and get regular screens and they can catch cancer early and potentially live a significantly longer life. Let me introduce you now to the Beery twins, diagnosed with cerebral palsy at the age of 2. Their mom is a very brave woman who didn't believe it. The symptoms weren't matching up, and through some heroic efforts and a lot of internet searching, she was able to convince the medical community that in fact they had something else. What they had was DOPA-responsive dystonia, and so they were given L-DOPA. And their symptoms did improve, but they weren't totally asymptomatic. Significant problems remained. Turns out the gentleman in this picture is a guy named Joe Beery, who was lucky enough to be the CIO of a company called Life Technologies. They're one of the two companies that makes these massive whole genome sequencing tools. And so what he did was he got his kids sequenced, and what they found was a series of mutations in a gene called SPR, which is responsible for producing serotonin, among other things. So on top of L-DOPA, they gave these kids a serotonin precursor drug, and they're effectively normal now. Guys, this would never have happened without whole genome sequencing. And at the time, this was a few years ago, it cost $100,000. Today it's $10,000. Next year it's $1,000. The year after it's $100, give or take a year.